I was recovering between jobs when I got an odd request. Someone named Jacob wanted me to teach him more about magic. The name didn't ring a bell at first, but I soon realized he was the hunter we'd saved from the bug-infested hotel. I agreed to the request, but also asked August if he could spare some time. I've been involved with supernatural creatures since I was a child. My first romantic relationship was a cute creature who had mimic powers when I was about 17. Even with all my experience, I would never fully understand how my magic worked better than someone's who relied on it as a life force. August agreed, and we arrived at the empty park first. While we waited, we played rock, paper, scissors, because Lucas had recently gotten into playing it with others. August wasn't too great at it, so I let him practice with me for a few minutes. He kept throwing out rock because, in his words, he liked rocks. Jacob showed up, giving us an expression that made it seem as if he'd regretted his decision. He was looking good considering how close he'd come to death recently. He still wore the long coat, but changed his shoes to something more practical. This is August. He knows a lot, so he agreed to help. How long have you been working as a contract worker? I asked after Jacob walked over. He blew a strand of long hair out of his face. If he wanted to do this job, he should at least keep his hair tied back. 2 months. I called because I figured he had connections to getting better weapons. How much would a big gun cost me? He sounded like a teenager. I bet he wasn't even 19 yet. August smiled and gave me a side-eye at the mention of a gun. I nudged him silently, ordering him not to make fun of a newbie. A lot, but I wouldn't suggest a gun. If you're going to invest that sort of money in a powerful weapon, a blade along with charming your coat would be better. Is your jacket special? Most hunters wore jackets that weren't just for fashion reasons. They could be fused with magic or parts of supernatural creatures to make the fabric resist damage. Some of the more advanced jackets were almost like a living creature bonded with the owner. The suits the agents wore offered the same kind of protection. I've also heard of supernatural mailmen who had uniforms that protected them better than most jackets hunters could get their hands on. It's not a magic one, if that's what you're asking. And why should I use a sword instead of a gun? Isn't keeping your distance better when it comes to monsters? Jacob argued, clearly already annoyed. Ditch the jacket, August chimed in. The younger man scowled. Before he could question the statement, August had closed the distance between them. He slipped behind Jacob, took hold of his long coat, and pulled. I watched the pair as the kid frantically got back to his feet time and time again. No matter how much he tried dodging, August just caught the jacket and swept him off his feet again. By the time I broke the two up, Jacob had removed the coat, only for August to steal it away and tie it around the boy. He had only bruised Jacob's ego, but that was enough for his face to turn red in frustration. I get it, no long coats. Are you happy? Now tell me where I can get a damn gun. He tossed the coat to the ground, face sweaty and hands shaking from rage. August wasn't done. He reached over and tied Jacob's hair back with a fair amount of protest. Jacob left his hair back, accepting the message, but still angry as hell. To get back to the gun versus sword question, it's mostly based on mass. A bullet is way smaller than a blade. 10 bullets would do less damage than a single stab from even a dagger. I started to explain. I call bullshit, Jacob snorted. I knew he was just a little baby, but I didn't understand how much of one, August teased. I swear they were seconds away from a slapping fight. I sighed, shaking my head. I hated just how often people like Jacob became hunters. They thought they could just pick up a few weapons to slaughter evil creatures, without understanding how magic even worked. August, I'm gonna pretend to stab you, I told him so he would walk near me. To Jacob's confusion, he watched me land a fake stab into August's chest. The dramatic acting out of a fake death wasn't needed to prove my point, though. Magic is power that requires your will to control. A blade moves your entire body, your entire will to flow into it. An attack is more powerful based on the actions and intentions behind it. August stayed on the ground and nodded along with my explanation. Jacob didn't appear overly impressed. You need to put your entire body into firing a gun, like getting in the right position to aim. So why doesn't that count? He pointed out, arms crossed. I started to go into a more detailed lecture about the difference between shooting a bullet and using a blade against a supernatural creature. There were a few factors that made swords the preferred weapon. All the willpower and magic get channeled into the sword in an attack. While firing a gun, the magic gets poured into the gun itself and not the bullets. Sure, bullets could be blessed, and depending on what type you use, they could kill strong creatures. But those kind of bullets were out of most hunters' budgets to create. Not even the corporation used them, because of how hard they were to produce. Also, most hunters who start out relying on firepower think they're safe at a distance. They don't properly train their body to avoid counterattacks. Monsters can fire magic, or move faster than some humans can react. As I spoke, Jacob appeared more and more defeated. Even August got bored, and started to scroll on his phone while on the ground. I would have kept going, but Jacob raised a hand to make me stop speaking. "Where can I buy a magic sword, then?" He sighed. August stood up and shoved his phone into my face, trying to show off some sort of cat meme I ignored. "You can borrow them through the corporation when you accept a contract job. In fact, you can borrow all sorts of supplies you might need for a job. If you return the items clean and with minimal damage, they won't charge you for the use." Jacob gave me a look that told me he wished I'd just told him all that to start with. "Do you want to do a few easy jobs together? You need more experience before taking on more dangerous work. And it would be nice to not deal with this brain eater for once," I offered as I started to push August away. He had gotten bored and draped himself over my left side. Sometimes I wondered why he was so comfortable fooling around and acting so dumb around me. "Brain eater? Like, as in, he eats monster brains?" Jacob asked, as his entire body grew more tense. His mood completely changed. It was as if he was suddenly standing in front of a man-eating beast ready to strike. "Monster or human. Not overly picky," August announced. I should have realized that bringing along August was a bad idea. I wasn't thinking properly that day. Jacob drew a handgun he kept hidden at his waist and fired in our direction. The bullet was weak, and his movements were slower than August's. He raised a hand that transformed into a set of claws, protected with a hard shell. I slightly jumped at the sound, but was more confused than startled. "The hell is wrong with you?" Jacob shouted in disgust. "He's a monster and you're that close with him?" I knew hunters hated supernatural creatures and refused to work with them, but I didn't see Jacob as a real hunter because he'd taken contract work. I just figured he had already worked alongside creatures before. I suppose that was the only difference between a contract worker and a hunter. Contract workers did whatever they needed to be paid. Hunters just wanted to kill supernatural creatures. "Partnering up with creatures for jobs is natural in this line of work. You'll die if you don't," I calmly said. "Are you even still human siding with them?" he shouted again. Jacob reached up to pull out the hair elastic which August had used to tie back his hair. Utter hatred and rage showed on his face, as his wild hair fell. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no words came. I didn't think when it came to dealing with supernatural creatures, there were simple black and white answers, as Jacob believed. "Almost every contract worker dies because of their job, regardless of whether they accept help with creatures or not. It's your choice to stand by what you think is right, and live the life you're comfortable with," August said in an even tone. Jacob made a noise and scooped up his jacket. I called after him, but he stormed off, refusing to even look back. Yes, August was right. Contract workers had a high mortality rate, but Jacob wouldn't last 2 weeks the way he was now. "You could have handled that a bit better," I scolded August. "He shot at us. I think I gave him as much respect as he deserved." He shrugged. Something was up with him today. His playful interactions felt almost forced. He didn't carry the same kind of energy as normal. "Oh, please. As if that bullet was actually a threat," I added with a huff. "Why are you so upset over this? You didn't even know his name until today. You're not his family or even his friend. Who cares if he's not listening to the advice that'll keep him alive?" August questioned. He had a point. Jacob and I had different worldviews, and I doubted we would ever get along. I still didn't want him to die if it could be avoided. I knew people risking their lives was required because of the supernatural threats always ready to strike innocent people, but that didn't mean contract workers or agents needed to throw their lives away. I didn't agree with how hunters did things, and yet I wouldn't want them slaughtered just because they couldn't get past the idea of working with a supernatural creature. He's human. That means he's weak. We don't have power compared to creatures like you. I just wish he accepted the help. Who says humans don't have the power to deal with us? I noticed August reach up to rub the side of his neck through his buttoned-up shirt collar. I've heard the only ones with the skill to bind creatures with a black collar were humans or half-breeds. He had been leashed twice because of a weaker species. Once by using magic, and the second time with love. Is something bothering you? I asked, directing our conversation in a different direction. August seemed to consider if he wanted to tell me. He lowered his hands and shook his head. No, not really. If it becomes a thing, I'll tell you about it. It's not worth worrying about until I have more information. What did that mean? I didn't get the chance to ask him because both of our cell phones went off. We checked the message at the same time. August's face brightened, seeing what had just been sent through. Want to do a job together? An urgent call came asking for help with an ongoing attack. We accepted the request and were on the move in seconds. A door appeared to take us to a different park elsewhere in the world, and right into the middle of a fight. I didn't even have a weapon because I hadn't expected to work that day. We took half a second to look over the utter chaos we had just stepped into. 2 agents were suits or rushing around getting civilians to safety. A third was making doorways to get people away, but also to bring in backup like us. The threat was a massive plant with thick vines lashing out, trying to grab any living thing within reach. I need a weapon, I shouted at the agent making the doors. He pulled out a dagger and 3 paper charms, just as a vine came between us. I was able to grab the dagger and a charm, but I lost 2 of the papers in the process of avoiding the attack that could have taken my arm off. I didn't have time to waste trying to get the paper charms I dropped. I ran forward, dodging attacks and cutting the vines as often as I could. August went to work on a counterattack right away. With his sharp claws, he could cut back the vines almost as fast as they recovered. We were separated as he focused on helping the agent, and I used myself as a distraction. The park must have been full when this monster plant started to attack. I figured at least 10 more people needed to be escorted away. Another vine came down, just as I noticed a girl hiding behind a trash can. I rolled to dodge the crushing attack, and then kept going towards her. My heart felt cold from fear. I watched in horror as she was grabbed by the ankle, and then dragged across the grass into a large, mouth-like pod. I heard screams behind me, as more people had been grabbed. August saved me from a vine coming down almost slicing me in half. I didn't stop running towards the pod with the new victim. I shouted out a request that sounded more like an order. "Help the agents," I told him. He didn't even take the time to nod. He ran off again, knowing his efforts were better used to protect the larger group of people. I reached the pod and slammed the dagger into the soft flesh of the plant. I hacked away, creating a large enough opening for me to see the girl slowly being dragged further inside. A thick slime from inside the pod hit my hand, causing pain. It splashed over my face as I cut. Acid immediately started taking off layers of my skin. I closed my left eye tight to keep it from being burned away. It hurt like hell, but I refused to stop. Within seconds, I had torn away enough of the pod to reach in and grab a hold of the girl under her arms. The acid was much slower at going through the fabric. By some miracle, I got her out, the plant recoiling in pain from the damage. She had fainted from the experience, so I dragged her limp body a few feet away. Her back had taken most of the damage from the acidic slime. She wore a hijab that was slowly dissolving. If she hadn't worn so many layers, she would have gotten way more burns. I pulled off my jacket and cut off the sleeves that the acid touched. The rest of the coat was clean. August appeared again and picked up the girl. I wrapped my jacket around her hair and asked him to keep her covered before I turned away to keep fighting. In the past 2 minutes, it looked like most of the people inside the park had been saved, and now we could focus on defeating the plant monster. The massive vines parted to reveal a tall, humanoid shape growing from the ground. The eyes were closed, and it seemed like the actions were being done on instinct. An odd feeling came from my feet. It was as if the ground suddenly felt hollow, like I would fall through if I put too much weight on where I was standing. I focused on the ground, using my sight to see the flow of magic. This plant was draining everything around it. If we didn't stop it soon, it would absorb everything in the ground, making it impossible for anything to grow here again. A sharp pain came from my only open eye, as something inside me snapped. My hand flew over my face as waves of pain rippled from it. I took a second or two to recover and carefully blinked away the pain. What I saw and heard terrified me down to my core. I've never been so frightened in my life. I saw nothing unusual. No plant monster, no flow of magic, no agents or August. I heard nothing. The air felt so empty. I shook my head, refusing to believe this was happening. I'd stressed out my eyesight before, causing my sight to be blurry, but nothing like this had ever happened. Some humans have no sense of the supernatural. They can't see or interact with magic or creatures, and creatures also don't see them. For a moment, I assumed I stressed out my eyes so much I lost my sight altogether. It felt like a core part of myself had been ripped away. Slowly, it all started to come back. Hazy at first, but then the sounds of the battle came back in full force. I should have been thankful, but since I could see the plant monster again, I knew it could also see me. A vine caught my ankle. It lifted my body off the ground, and I was slammed down so hard I blacked out for a few seconds. I heard ribs crack and break. When I opened my eyes again, I was dangling 5 feet above the monster's wide-open mouth, ready to devour me. I dropped my dagger. I was beaten and weak. August and the agents weren't within range of being able to save me. I needed to think. What the hell could I do? I had an idea, but I didn't know if it would work. I took my cell phone out from my jeans pocket, glad I didn't keep it in my jacket. I also kept the paper charm in my pants pocket. I stuck the charm to my phone and threw it towards the open mouth, just as the creature let go of my ankle. The charms are nothing but a bunch of magic inside a spell on the paper. More complex ones do different things, but that one was set to explode 3 seconds after I stuck it to something. I'd made a makeshift grenade. Somehow, it saved me. The magic blew apart the plant's mouth and throat. August caught me mid-air, and we landed hard on the ground. Now that the plant was weakened, the agents and the backup that just arrived could take care of the rest. August carefully put me on the ground. I was barely awake. Everything hurt. While the vine had been around my ankle, it had drained my energy. I couldn't even lift my arm if I wanted. "The girl?" I asked in a weak voice. "She's fine," August told me. For some reason, he used a claw to cut into his palm. I watched in confusion as he started to rub a bloody hand over the acid burns on my arms. I winced in pain, but didn't have the strength to pull away. "My blood neutralizes acid and poisons," he explained. "Gross," I mumbled. "We'll get you to the clinic in a second." At those words, I weakly grabbed at his now dirty button-down shirt. "No, costs too much. No clinic. Just let me sleep." I slumped back to the ground and ended up passing out again. I just exploded my phone. I couldn't take a trip to the clinic for some broken ribs and burns if I wanted to afford a new one. I half expected to wake up at the clinic anyway, but I found myself in my own bed. Next to me were piles of fresh rolls of bandages. I was able to sit up enough to look myself over. I was almost a mummy from being wrapped up tightly in so many of those bandages. I knew that these were magic. They sped up healing and would disappear once the magic was used up. I hated to think how expensive all this would be. I heard a noise coming from my apartment. Soon a person came inside the room. I'd never met them before, but I knew a little about her species. "Oh good, you're awake. I'm Raru. I took care of you," she said, as she pulled a chair over and sat next to my bed. Her body looked like it was made of a pastel purple jello. Their species didn't really have a name, but most people called them slimes, even though their bodies were firm. From what I'd heard, they were on the weaker side, magic-wise, but could quickly learn skills. For a while, they had been used for less than desirable things. Now they had started to be treated much better, and worked hard to get respectable jobs. "Thank you. Did August hire you?" I asked, wondering how much I would need to pay him back. "Yes. I'm training to be a nurse and just need to complete my volunteer hours. All the treatment I did won't cost you anything, because you're doing me a favor by letting me work on you. But I only worked on everything above the waist. I understand how people feel about my kind, and you weren't awake to consent on anything else that might have made you uncomfortable." Raru fidgeted in her seat. Her hair was made of the same material as the rest of her body, but she styled it to look like a short bob. She wore plain blue scrubs that matched her profession. I felt bad that she was trying so hard, but some people would never see past her species. The slime creatures were a recently created race. At first, slime creatures weren't sentient. They were dolls that could do simple tasks, so you can imagine what they were used for. "You're a nurse, and I trust you. But thank you for considering that." Her face turned into a smile. I knew she was going to make a great nurse or doctor. I thanked her again, and she got ready to leave. We went over how long I needed to rest, when I needed to put on the new bandages, and things like that. She also told me August had dropped off a new phone for me. He had already put in his contact information. He also made my lock screen a very cute photo of Lucas, which I changed. I did love that kid, but I wasn't related to him. People might think it's weird I had a photo of an unrelated child on my phone screen like that. Since I was now bedridden for a while, I started setting up my phone again and tracked down the rest of my contacts. It was really to distract myself from thinking about the moment when my eyesight failed me. I was also trying not to think about Jacob. I would have died if August hadn't done as much as he did. I simply could not do this job if I didn't have help from supernatural creatures. I just hope Jacob learned that lesson before it was too late. I'd recently made a large payment on my medical debt. For the first time, it seemed as if I could pay it off within the next few years. But now my bank account was hurting. When August asked us to work together, I didn't ask too many questions. I needed all the jobs I could get. When I arrived at the start of the forest trail, I understood why August was so eager to take this request. It was a run-of-the-mill investigation, looking into some disappearances from the campsites. According to the email, 3 couples had gone missing without a trace. It was a bit odd that whatever had been targeting the campers was only taking them in pairs. But this forest was a bit odd. Still, it was strange in a good way. The air was so fresh it felt almost like it removed any tension or stress from your body. The magic that ran through the trees was so pure I didn't doubt creatures flocked here. The place just felt right. I wouldn't have minded spending more time there. I adjusted the straps of my pack, wondering why August was so late. Suddenly, I was ambushed. Someone wrapped their arms around me from behind and started rubbing their cheek against mine. I let out a startled noise and shoved the person away. "What are you doing?" I demanded. August didn't answer. He just attacked again. After a few seconds of the assault, he released me. "I'm getting my scent all over you. It's better than any bug spray," he explained. He was acting different. His face was bright and he couldn't stand still. He looked like a kid on Christmas. I took a step away from him, but he didn't notice. I figured we should do this job together, since couples are going missing, he explained as he started to walk down the path through the woods. We are not acting like a couple, I announced. I only brought one tent, he said with a raised eyebrow. I made a noise he didn't appear to notice. As we walked, his eyes kept darting around. His hands turned into sharp claws, and I saw traces of his insect face start showing. There wasn't a threat, he just wasn't able to hold himself back. Out of nowhere, he shouted, his face fully transforming. I can't help myself. I'll see you later. I watched in stunned silence as he bolted off into the trees. The last I saw of him was his claws digging into the soft dirt so he could rub his face against the ground. It appeared like the air was a bit too good for him. I didn't get upset that he abandoned me. I figured this trip would be good for him. From what I heard, he was born and raised in a forest by some mountains. After his home had been destroyed, he'd been stuck inside a city and going between jobs. I left him to do whatever he needed, as I kept hiking, knowing he would catch up. The forest was almost too perfect. I didn't sense any kind of danger. Even the animals weren't afraid of a stranger in their home. Since the last set of disappearances, the forest had been emptied of campers. I stopped by a few abandoned campsites looking for any signs of foul play. There was nothing to make me think that the couples were harmed. I wore myself out from all the travel. I settled on a campsite and got started on setting up the tent. Dinner was a can of soup. When it grew too dark to see, I decided to call it a day. August hadn't even sent a text yet. I was starting to worry about him. But I hadn't gotten any kind of bad vibes from the place. Maybe he'd just lost track of time. I left the tent open in case he showed up. Not a single insect bothered me the entire time I was inside the forest. A cool breeze blew through the open flap of the tent, which made me glad I could keep it open without worrying about getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. I was half inside my sleeping bag on my side, almost asleep, when I heard footsteps. I tensed up and grabbed the handle of the weapon I had borrowed for this job. It was an 8-inch blade that looked a bit like a regular kitchen knife. Listening while I kept my eyes closed, I waited for the person to get closer. Are you asleep? I let myself relax a little when I heard August speak. But something might be copying his voice. I opened my eyes a crack to peek out of the tent, to see his figure in the dark. I could easily tell it was him. Masking what your magic looks like was a very hard thing to do. I closed my eyes again as I listened to him climb into the tent. I expected him to get settled into the sleeping bag that I'd set up beside me, but he didn't. I felt eyes on me, so I rolled onto my back to see what was going on. He had carefully positioned himself over my body. He smelled like river water, and his hair dripped small droplets onto my face. August must have washed himself off somewhere nearby, after digging around in the dirt. But why was he hovering above me like that? And why the hell was he looking at me the way he was? At first, I assumed he was just joking around. Goosebumps appeared on my arms, and I wanted to push him away. What the hell are you doing? I hissed. Couples have been disappearing. We should play the part, he replied in a low voice. When he started to close the distance between us, I let out a shrill noise and tossed him to the side. I shot up, ready to grab my knife in case he lost it. August started to roll around, cackling as he did so. I scowled when I realized why he was acting so weird. He was drunk. The magic in this area was too pure for him. I'd heard of creatures getting high while being in places like this, but I'd never seen it before. Go to sleep, I ordered. With my face red, I rolled back on my side and slipped the knife back under the thin pillow. August laughed for a little while longer. At least one of us enjoyed his little prank. Do you like guys? He asked. I felt my face grow a deep shade of red. I turned around to look at him, confused over the question. Who told you? I started, then realized I just outed myself. I rolled back in a huff. I prefer girls, but there've been a few cute guys around lately. And no, I'm not talking about you. After you've seen someone eat a person's brain out of their skull, it was hard to ever have romantic feelings for them. He finally settled down, and I was hoping he was just going to drop all this. What guys? He pressed. No one you know. What about you? Are there any single parents you met while dropping off Lucas? I had hoped I could deflect the question to avoid answering it. I heard him stretch and shake his head against the sleeping bag. There are a few single and not-so-single parents who appeared interested in me. They're not to my taste. I don't have any interest in that sort of thing right now. There isn't any time between taking care of Lucas and staying on top of work. Besides, do you think a normal human could ever handle knowing what I am? He was right about that. I had known about creatures since I was able to walk. I couldn't imagine how hard it would be for a future romantic partner of his to deal with knowing he killed and ate humans. I still didn't know how I felt about it. Or what my feelings toward August really were. Are we friends? We acted like it. At the same time, I found that hard to accept, considering what he was. For some reason, I was fine with Ito, Harp, April, and even Klaus. For some reason, it felt almost wrong to accept that August and I were close. It's all a bit tragic. He spoke in the darkness, his voice carrying an unusual weight. Things would be far easier if we were all truly the monsters humans see us as. The ability to feel love may be the cruelest trick played on all of us. I stayed silent, letting his words turn in my head. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw August had fallen asleep. He was right. It was cruel. The world would be so much easier to deal with if every creature had no remorse and slaughtered humans for fun. Sure, there were some out there that had hearts darker than the bottom of the ocean, but there were also supernatural creatures who loved and cared for humans. They would risk their own lives to save them. Like August. Some also preyed on humans as a food source, all while being able to deeply care for them. Hunters saw all supernatural creatures as something to be erased from the world. They considered magic unnatural, and while they tried to save people from bad monsters, they killed the good ones too. Some days it felt like there were no right answers. Nothing was black and white when it came to supernatural creatures and humans interacting. If I called August a friend, I bet there would be a few people who would condemn me for it. He'd killed people, and they wouldn't care if they were good people or not. I didn't consider their views invalid. It was just all so damn complicated. A few years ago, I decided not to care about what others said about my relationships with creatures. My feelings were the only thing that mattered in my life, and I found myself unsure of my feelings toward August. All these kinds of thoughts went through my mind as I let myself drift off to sleep. I wasn't certain of what time it was when I woke up. The world was nothing but gray. I sat up to look outside the tent. A dense fog blocked my sight of anything beyond a step or two from where I sat. I felt a bit tense, but at the same time, I couldn't sense any kind of threat. Reaching over, I shook August, trying to wake him up. His eyes remained closed, and his breathing was even. I shook him harder. Nothing. I didn't want to talk, just in case something was listening. Grabbing my knife, I poked the tip of a finger to make it bleed. Very carefully, I rubbed a few drops of blood against his lips. Then I went so far as to rub it against his gums. Again, nothing. He was out for an unnatural reason. I was alone to deal with whatever was going on. Slowly, I left the tent, gripping the handle of the knife tightly. The magic of this place was too dense. Everything was too bright to see when I looked carefully, trying to spot any kind of danger in the mist. My eyesight would be useless right now. It looked like my only real choice was to call for some help. So, of course, my cell phone wasn't working. Magic didn't agree with technology. My phone was beefier than most, and should have been able to handle some magic. But not this much. This worried me. I wasn't the strongest, and August wouldn't wake up. The magic of this forest was too pure to even consider using. It would fry me if I even took a small amount to fight with. My knife felt too small for comfort. Shapes started to appear out of the fog. Twisted hands reached out. I quickly slashed at them, the silver-tipped steel easily cutting through wood. As the threats got closer, I saw they were made up of branches and moss. Some appeared human, and others were a mixture of human and animal features. They were easy enough to take down, but I wasn't certain how many of them there were. If they had been made from the magic of this forest, that would mean their numbers could be endless. A long vine lashed out. I jumped over it, and focused on taking out another one of the attackers made of twigs. That was a mistake. The vine reached into the tent, grabbing hold of August by the ankle. I noticed just in time to cut the vine in two. The effort was for nothing. The vine suddenly started to overwhelm us. I couldn't fight off so many with just my knife. I lost the battle within seconds. The rough vines tore at my exposed skin. They ripped through the sleeves of my shirt and caused deep cuts in their wake. I gritted my teeth trying to push through them. One as thick as my arm wrapped around my waist. Another bent my wrist back so I would let go of the weapon. My body was slammed back and forth between heavy tree trunks until it was certain I was too stunned by pain to fight back. Then it dropped me. I landed on my stomach on the hard ground. My entire body ached. I felt something grab hold of my wrists, then pull them painfully together against my back. No matter how much I struggled, I couldn't get my hands free, or even lift my body off the ground. I looked up, expecting to see those monsters start attacking. But instead, I saw something much more terrifying. All the sounds stopped. The air grew so heavy it nearly suffocated me. My body started to tremble on its own. Another figure started walking closer at a slow pace. Each step made my heart beat faster. I didn't need my sight to see the massive amount of magic it carried. Forests with a large flow of magic almost gain a personality. Each forest felt different, but they normally never gained a will of their own. Complex thoughts and emotions are normally impossible for an abstract idea as the representation of the forest itself. When creatures like that come into this world, it causes a big stir. I think there may have only been 4 or 5 people at the corporation who were on the same level as a will of the forest. They could almost be considered as gods. And one was walking towards me. Since they don't have physical bodies, they often gather what they can find to make one out of. The forest was covered with a shawl made of leaves. A tower of antlers made up what should have been its head and face. It stood and carefully moved on feet stolen from a young deer. 8 human arms on each side came from the shawl, and lined its tall body. Why do these kinds of monsters always take human arms? When it stopped a few feet away from me, it raised an arm. I thought I was dead in that second. The vines lifted August off the ground, his head still limp. His arms were pulled to his side. I could do nothing but watch as the vine started to pull and twist his left arm. A voice I didn't recognize screamed at them to stop as his bones were broken. His face twisted in pain, but his eyes didn't open. More screams came, begging for them to leave him alone. To my shock, I had been the one yelling, without being aware of it. The vine stopped moving after his arm had been mangled. My eyes stung with angry tears. I hated how powerless I was at that moment.
Choice. Your life. His.
The forest spoke in an airy voice that chilled me down to my very core. I stared in disbelief. Was it lying, or would it really let one of us go? So far, only couples had disappeared. I knew if I refused to pick one of us, we would both die. A godlike power stood in front of me, waiting for an answer. I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead hard into the dirt, never wanting to ever have to make this choice. August wasn't human, so he should be the one sacrificed, right? He had at one point been so dangerous they placed a black collar on him. He'd killed and eaten humans. He would have killed me when we first met if he'd gotten the chance. He was a monster who loved his son. I hit my forehead against the ground, trying not to think about that. I would die if I let myself think anything positive about him. But those thoughts didn't stop. He was the best person to raise Lucas, regardless of not being human. No matter what sins he had committed in the past, an innocent boy shouldn't go without his adopted father. All the stupid jokes and smiles came rushing through my mind, no matter how hard I tried to block them out. How did I feel about him? What were we to each other? At this rate, I should be the one to give up my life. I had nothing but a mountain of medical debt. No family, only a few friends who could easily move on when I was gone. I was nothing. Not a soul would miss me. I gritted my teeth, thinking back to 2 years ago. My partner had given her life for me. I'm still trying to get back on my feet. She would be insulted if I gave up now. I opened my eyes again to look around at my surroundings. Vines were ready and waiting to attack if I moved. More of those branch monsters also waited. My knife was directly in front of my face, but my hands were still bound. August wouldn't wake up, and we were facing a forest with more power than anything I'd ever dealt with combined.
Time's up. Pick yours or his.
The forest spoke again. I had no chance of beating this thing. If we were both gonna die, I wasn't gonna let it kill me without at least doing something. Fucking neither, I hissed. I sat up enough to bite down on the handle of the knife. It took in magic and forced it through my jaw to make it clamp down and stay shut. Saying that hurt was an understatement. I then took a huge risk of dispelling the magic around us. It's a basic trick of enforcing your will outwards, to push the power around your body away. If you don't have enough power behind the request, the magic in the air explodes. My luck held out. The power forced back the vines and creatures, but not the forest. The effort burned every cell in my body. There was a reason why people didn't use that trick very often. I needed to act fast before the creatures recovered. Using raw magic had massive drawbacks. I gathered some from the ground and focused it on the bottom of my left foot. Using that power, I kicked off the ground. It was basically an explosion. Yes, I jumped 8 feet off the ground, but it caused all the bones in my left foot to shatter. And I was going to do the same thing to my right foot. I spun, so I was now facing the ground, as my right foot hit a branch. I used double the power to kick off the branch, and downward toward the forest, staring up at my actions. If I lived through this, it would take a lot of magic so I could use my foot again. I came down hard, driving everything I had into sinking the blade into the mess of antlers that made up the face of the forest. I landed painfully on the ground, the knife still buried in the creature's face. Rolling on my back, I took stock of how I was doing. Both feet had been shattered. My jaw ached. My hands were still bound. Every ounce of my body ached. Oh, and the forest was removing the knife from its face as if it was nothing. Great. I was gonna die and I didn't even make a scratch.
Do you love him?
The airy voices whispered. I was about to pass out. My body was at the end of its limits. I slowly shook my head, wondering if our deaths would be swift.
I don't know how I feel about him,
I said, voice rough. The antlers held no expression, but to me, they appeared confused.
He's done some good things. He's done some bad things. I'm worried I'll become a bad person if we become friends. It's like, I don't care about the bad stuff, you know? It's just hard to explain, and I don't understand it myself. I feel like his good side is too good for me. Being human and interacting with creatures is so damn frustrating.
I doubted this creature had ever had such a weird answer to a simple question. Regardless, I didn't pick either option, so that meant it was the end for us. I let my eyes close, wanting an easy and quiet death. I woke up with droplets of rain hitting my face. I hurt just as much as before. The world appeared gray, but the fog had lifted. August was sitting next to me, knees up to his chest and a confused smile on his face. "Something happened?" he asked. He looked fine. His arm had healed without any issues, most likely because of the pure air of this forest. I wished I was that lucky. When he started to help me move, I found out I was at least a little lucky. The foot on my bad leg had healed to a sprain, but my other was still shattered. I didn't know if the healing was from the pure air of the woods, or if the forest had left a parting gift. August needed to help me hobble into the corporation office to explain what happened. Thank God for magic doors. They were able to treat my wounds there. The foot brace I needed to keep on cost me the entire amount I made from that job. Still, it beat a broken foot. The small clinic area outside the office was mostly empty. A nurse started looking over the wounds on my arms when Klaus came inside. He took over so I could give my full report as he worked. It felt a little bit weird to have him fussing over me. I honestly didn't know his position or his job title. He seemed to be the person who collected all the information about the jobs, and nothing much more. Based on his old scars, I assumed he was semi-retired. "What happens now?" I asked him after my arms were finished getting wrapped up. "You take some bed rest, mister," he said with a sharp inhale of breath. I think he was annoyed that I nearly died. Again. "You know what I mean," I pressed. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, and let out a large sigh. "You already know. We'll do whatever we can to ensure couples don't camp inside that park. If the forest switches who they target, we'll deal with it then," he admitted. I wanted to be angry, but I felt too damn tired. That was it. The families of the people who went missing wouldn't get closure, because the creature who killed their loved ones was too powerful to deal with. This sort of thing happens far too often. I shouldn't have been upset about it, but I was. "Why did it let us go?" I asked, honestly confused why I was still alive. "Well, that's an easy answer. You're amusing," Klaus said, flashing a smile. I frowned, not liking his answer. "No, really. If we know, then maybe someone else could be saved," I pointed out. He shrugged, shaking his head. "Who knows why some creatures do what they do? Could be a complex reason humans may never understand. Or just because they felt like it. That's what makes this job so damn hard. Either way, you're alive. August gets to go home to see his son. And we're all thankful for the positive outcome. I don't get to see enough people coming back safe. There's a reason why these beds are empty." I felt my stomach drop at his words. I was the only one getting medical treatment at that moment. I almost felt guilty for complaining as much as I did. Klaus stood up and made me promise to get some rest, and to also watch out for August. He heard I broke a few bones and was convinced that eating hard-boiled eggs with the shell was a way to get them to heal faster. I prayed Lucas never got sick or hurt, because of how well-meaning and misinformed his adopted father could be. I could walk around with the magic foot brace. But for once, I listened and stayed in bed to rest. I hated being in one spot, though. The idea of that forest being free to take any victims it pleased bothered me. I hated how powerless I was. But that's how things were with magic. More experience meant more strength. Humans simply didn't live long enough to compete against monsters. I should just be glad I was still alive after everything. While on bed rest, I called Ito to see how his jobs were going. He was fairly busy, so we couldn't see each other. But at least talking to him helped me get my mind off a few things until the next job. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.